This information is for educational purposes only, does not constitute legal advice, and does not create an attorney client relationship. If you need legal assistance about a legal problem, contact an attorney. You're watching Healthcare Pros Charting Texas, where we break down your healthcare license risks and regulations in just a few minutes. I'm Simone Murphy, and this is your Friday Focus brought to you by Know Your Regulator.
Part of your evaluation is an occupational profile. So we're trying to get a very good idea of the human, who the human is that we're working with. And so I always ask them, like, so tell me about some of the things that you feel like you've lost and you want to make sure that we work on during therapy while you're here. And the top two answers were always like, I want to be able to play video games and I want to have sex. So,
Yeah.
like fair enough for both of those, right? I started to do a lot of adaptive gaming kind of on like by myself. And it was just like making splints so they could hold a controller, a
Mhm.
traditional. So like your traditional controller looks like this, right? So you have, two hands, buttons, joysticks. And so to be able to hold a controller like that, you obviously have to have two hands. If I'm missing a hand, all of a sudden it gets a lot more tricky because I'm trying to push all these buttons with one hand. And even more challenging is even if I could do it, I have to hold it somehow. So I would
Right.
start making splints for the residual limb that would just hold the controller while you can do all the other motions, right? So that was like kind of that first step. And then I started researching a lot of different types of controllers in general. If you're familiar with Dance Dance Revolution, it's a bunch of buttons on the ground and they're
Mhm.
just buttons. And so you could really just use those buttons as just big buttons. So if I lost a hand, maybe I can use one of those buttons as a foot,
Yeah.
and so I started looking at all these different adaptive type of ways to be able to play. And at one point in time, an engineer came in and he started talking about, "Oh, what are you guys doing over there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm, trying to get this guy to be able to play." And he's like, "Well, why don't you just take this button and then you can just put, like these buttons over on this side and then, put this over here and just." And I was like, like I'm not an engineer, I can't do that stuff.
Right.
And so he and I teamed up to start doing some of this stuff. And so what he would do is he would actually like rip apart one of these controllers. He would solder like buttons that would come out, big buttons. And so then you'd be able to like hit buttons around that were linked directly to the boards of the controller. And so we started making these little adaptive devices. We'd make these big rigs, and we'd put the buttons kind of connected to the controller out, and sip and puff controls, all kinds of different things. And so we created our nonprofit, which is Warfighter Engaged, and we basically were like, let's do something where we can do this service for free for service members, veterans, and families, and then we would, get donations money to be able to contribute to that, right? And so at one point in time, Microsoft gave us like they saw what we were doing. Xbox was like, "Hey, we love what you guys are doing. Would you mind coming to Redmond, Washington, which is right outside of Seattle, to Xbox headquarters and talk to some of our developers?" And so we got connected with the team out there and started talking about possible options where, hey, what if we did this kind of adaptive controller like a hub where we can put all these buttons in, and so instead of having to reinvent the wheel, and solder things together, we can just plug things in and it'll just work.
Mhm.
And so there was this hackathon. They came up with this concept, and it was the first time any hackathon had produced a winner that was hardware, and this was the hardware. And so that was the beginning of the journey for the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And of course, if you look at it, it's this is it, right? So we take the traditional controller that is, this one, and we make it into that. And so the big key component was like we have to have all the switches that are on a controller be able to plug into a controller. And so what you see back here is 19 different inputs, and then you have some on the sides for joysticks, and they can be completely customizable, adaptable, and you get this beautiful kind of system where you can plug and play in game as it's happening. And so that's kind of how it started. That's it was crazy because when we got the call, they were like, hey, would you come out to Microsoft and Xbox? We're like, yes, 100%.
No questions
So
asked. I'm
no
there.
questions asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so cool. It was such a neat thing.
Thanks for tuning in to Healthcare Pros Charting Texas. For more insights like this, follow along and keep learning.
Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage.